Dead Rising fucking rocks. It is one of those games that I never thought I would enjoy. I thought the timer would make me too stressed and that the mechanics were too archaic to still hold up. I was dead wrong, pun intended. It is one of the best zombie games I've ever played, and it definitely earns its title as a classic. Dead Rising is a game about excess. Excess zombies, excess gore, excess consumerism, excess personality. It is a satire of America's identity as the land of excess. Much like the late George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead from 1978, the influences are clear to see despite having no shared plot points or characters. It is simply in the tone, and I think Dead Rising is the best adaptation of a George Romero story because it uses the unique characteristics of the medium to broaden its themes. Last year I spent a whole month just watching George Romero's zombie films, from Night of the Living Dead all the way to Survival of the Dead. That's primarily because my only perspective on the zombie genre was Shaun of the Dead, Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright's spoof of zombie films, which also happens to be my second favorite film of all time. So I thought I would appreciate it more if I actually watched the source material it was spoofing on. And what I loved about those films was their unrelenting bleakness and political critique. It was clear he became more overt as time went on, to the point where in Land of the Dead, the rich people literally live in an ivory tower. However, even in Night of the Living Dead, everyone is constantly at odds with each other to their own detriment, and the main character that you've been rooting for this whole time is killed not by zombies, but by the people supposedly ending the conflict as soon as dawn breaks. The film was made in the height of the Vietnam War, and at the peak of the civil rights movement, so it was coincidentally, according to Romero, a very relevant film at the time, but its messaging is broad enough to still be relevant today. Romero has stated multiple times that his initial inspiration for making Dawn of the Dead came when he was shown one of the first shopping centers being built by a friend of his, and immediately thinking what a consumerist nightmare it represented.
What are they doing? Why did they come here?
Some kind of instinct, memory of what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
This was years before malls became the massive staple in culture that we know it as today, the monuments to capitalism. The balance that Romero managed to strike between horror and political satire is why his films are considered classics, and truly undefeated champions of the zombie genre. I believe the original Dead Rising manages to strike that same balance and is really the king of the zombie genre among video games. It wasn't the first, like Night of the Living Dead, but it definitely set the standard and influenced the wave of zombie games that plagued, pun not intended, the 7th generation of consoles. Keep in mind I have no nostalgia for this game. I just played it for the first time shortly after the remaster was announced. If you came here to listen to me shit on the remaster, that is not completely what this video is for. Don't worry, I will talk about how it ruined a lot of what Dead Rising did well. I just reckon everyone already knows how shit it is, but if you want to know my basic opinion, I think that DRDR is a butchered, blunted version of the original that does not nearly capture the magic that it had. Please just buy the original because it is still an amazing game that doesn't crash every hour like the remaster. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Come on, you little bastards!
George Romero's films are well known for their impressive gore effects. The practical effects by Tom Savini in all of these films are incredibly over the top and still impressive to look at despite how little the budgets were. They were constantly thinking of more and more creative ways of killing zombies for each movie. Capcom boasted Dead Rising's excessive blood and gore system in 2006. The amount of blood and limbs that gush out of zombies is completely unrealistic, but it feels great when hacking and slashing. Blood will even stick to Frank and cover him over time. These gore effects still look great to this day, not even the remaster could replicate it. The gameplay of Dead Rising is extremely over the top and often silly. Picking up random objects from stores that each have unique interactions and mechanics is incredibly entertaining. It would have been easy for the developers to simply make every object a blunt weapon, but no, each object is used in the way that they're expected to. You can ride skateboards and bikes and find books that allow you to do tricks. Instead of using the end of a golf club to hit zombies, you hit golf balls at them instead. There's a Mega Man blaster that shoots out little lemons. The sickle decapitates zombies with an awesome animation, or you can hold the attack button to sweep their legs. That's not to mention all of the moves Frank can do with his bare hands. I don't know if he's a retired wrestler or what, but damn, sign this guy to AEW already. Journalist Jones over here.
It's not just a big swing, Tony, it's a giant swing!
It even has a dedicated Hawk Tour button. A lot of the fun of OG Dead Rising is discovery and experimentation. The mall is full of great interactions and secrets. They even give you a camera so you can savor all of the precious moments and fun things you find in this mall. The photos you take give experience points, and certain objects have a sticker on them which give you a shit ton of points if you photograph them. It's just a brilliant example of extrinsic motivation. Every part of the game wants you to treat it like a tourist. It actively encourages the player to just have a blast browsing the shopping mall. Much like the characters in Dawn of the Dead, you can just enjoy the luxuries of taking whatever you want from shops with no need for currency. For example, you can dress however you want to. I love playing Dress to Impress. What, in Roblox? No, I mean in Dead Rising. Guys, be honest, what would you rate me? I don't know how Dress to Impress works. All I know is that my 11-year-old sister plays it.
It's like crazy.
Now I have to do the obligatory segment about how bad the AI is. I genuinely don't know how they fucked up this badly. The AI is absolutely brain dead, pun not intended. They will constantly get stuck in places they shouldn't, they'll stop dead in their tracks for absolutely no reason at the worst possible times, and even when you call them to follow you, they will try attacking zombies anyway and get killed. The best way to deal with them is to just be patient. Use the pointer to guide them, and if they get swarmed, just jump kick the zombies until they have enough space to move. Enemy AI also sucks. The cult members have no sense of self-preservation, and the soldiers are incredibly dumb, and they have to stop to aim just like you do, so you can easily whack them. The worst part is, Capcom didn't even try to fix them in the remaster. They straight up lied about fixing the AI, and they are just as brain dead. The only thing they changed was making the zombies way more docile, which adds to how stupid easy the remaster is, which I'll get into more later on. It reminds me of how the Dawn of the Dead remake by Zack Snyder completely removed the part of the original where people had to learn how to use guns. Everyone in 2004's Dawn of the Dead just inexplicably knows how to use guns just as effectively as the trained officers. It completely ruins any stakes that the story had. God, I fucking hate that movie. The difficulty of Dead Rising is part of what makes it so engaging to play. It is now one of my favorite survival horror games. It's not something that people would typically call a survival horror game, but it essentially is. The gameplay is centered around balancing these different resources: health, storage space, weapons, and especially time. It actually requires quite a bit of strategy to survive in Dead Rising. I experienced several instances where I had to properly plan my routes in order to maximize my time and item usage, very much like a Resident Evil game. The tone is quite silly most of the time, but when the story takes itself seriously, it is well earned. At least as seriously as you can when the player is wearing a dress suit and a horse head while running around with a mannequin torso. Similar to Dawn, it doesn't manipulate the audience to react to typical dramatic conventions. My first playthrough of Dead Rising was probably the most fun I've had with a zombie game. That is until I found out the mannequin torso is the most powerful weapon in the game and demolishes any boss. To be honest though, it's a discovery like this that makes this game so replayable. It is almost inevitable that your first time completing the game will require multiple playthroughs. Every time the player dies, it gives the option to save Frank's levels and experience and start a new game. I got to this point during the bomb search mission in the tunnels. The player is meant to feel like Roger in Dawn, running around confident in your abilities. Frank doesn't feel any responsibility because his helicopter is coming in exactly 3 days, but his cockiness costs him. Roger gets bitten when his overconfidence causes him to be careless, and he slowly realizes the hopelessness of his situation. Frank stands on the helipad hollering at the helicopter until a zombie kills the pilot and the helicopter goes down in flames. For Frank and the player, that was their only hope of getting out, and so Frank sits defeated, waiting for the inevitable. And credits roll.
So what you're doing is a waste of time, Sarah. And time is all we got left, you know.
What I'm doing. That's all there's left to do.
The passage of time is an extremely important part of this game, and the zombie genre. If you think about it, it represents hope and despair simultaneously. The existential dread of a zombie apocalypse is hoisted by the fact that it is only a matter of time before everyone turns, but also with time civilization could be rebuilt. One of my favorite parts of Day of the Dead is how it relates everything to time. It begins with a nightmare where the main character is in an empty room with a calendar, and it sets the onus of the story on that calendar. Time encapsulates the entire film. It provides the tension as these two very belligerent groups are stuck in a bunker together, surrounded by nothing but endless hordes of the undead. The scientists are given constant reminders that they are on borrowed time, while they try their best to come up with something that might help the situation. Numbers slowly dwindle until it all crescendos into an incredible cacophony of conflict, and it ends on the beach, where the main character marks the next day on the calendar. Time continues moving forward. In Dead Rising, the first mechanic you are ever introduced to is checking your watch. This is how you select cases to pursue and allows you to, well, check the time. Every time you enter a new area, a massive timer covers the screen counting down to when Frank's helicopter returns, giving the player hope while simultaneously reminding them of how long they have to survive for until that point. After Frank and the player realize that the helicopter is gone, Isabella saves us, and we try to survive until the military arrives. As Isabella figures out a way to escape, she finds out Frank is in the process of turning. We see the countdown on screen, and it is just as devastating for us as the player as it is for Frank. Every hope we had of escaping is taken away. The timer is not just aesthetic, however. Each case has a set time frame from when it takes place, which not only pushes the player to pay attention to their use of time, but also solves the issue that open-world games have of inconsistent pacing. The story progresses naturally and gives enough time for the player to digest each event. This mechanic also makes completion not feel like a checklist, similar to most open-world games. Each case is unique, and most likely the player will not be able to complete all of them, so they must decide which ones appeal to them the most. Like I said previously, this game constantly encourages multiple playthroughs, so the player can experience everything it has to offer. The feature of time in Dead Rising is honestly the most genius innovation they made, so of course they ruined it in the remaster by adding a time skip option. In the original, the player is left to survive while the military is killing everything on sight. You did have the choice to just wait in the safe room for a while, but it was incredibly boring, so it was encouraged to try your luck and take down some of the soldiers. That's not to mention how much PP they give as well, much like Peter and Steven in Dawn taking down the Raiders. With the time skip option, however, this not only ruins the perfectly timed pacing of the original, but it lets new players miss out on content that they have no knowledge of. It also messes with skill progression. The skill progression system in Dead Rising is very unique. Leveling up gives you a random upgrade to either Frank's health, speed, item capacity, or gives him a new skill. The great thing about this system is that it avoids min-maxing, and it makes every run-through all the more unpredictable. The PP distribution is set up so that the player can't reach the max level on a first playthrough, supporting the design choice of starting again and making better decisions. It gives PP quite conservatively so that the player feels weak at first, but it is fast enough to not be boring. It definitely feels earned when Frank becomes an insanely athletic killing machine. I have to explain all this because the remaster completely fucked this up. The PP distribution is so fast it is incredibly easy to reach max level. The player never feels the tension of possibly dying. On top of this, they added an autosave, so the punishment for dying is completely gone as well. The only thing that I was worried about was the game crashing. It is ultimately an empty experience, not just mechanically, but also in its art. Fran, Steven, and Peter, sitting in the now decked-out, fully furnished security room, eat a fancy meal in silence. Finally, Fran speaks out.
What have we done to ourselves?
George A. Romero's films were very low budget, and because of that, they have a certain charm and identity to them that can't be replicated. At times they provide comedy, but most of the time it creates a sort of intimacy that counterintuitively increases the stakes. These films have a small and relatively unknown cast, meaning that we feel more invested in their individual well-being. The setting also needed to be smaller in scope, vis-a-vis an entire film taking place in a house or a shopping mall. Visually, the budget can be seen, but it is again done in a way that gives them a unique identity. Night of the Living Dead, for example, was black and white when films were already using color. It was cheaper, but as Romero explains, it made the blood look more real.
Right. And I argued at the time that the most brutal scenes that I've ever seen, one of the most gory things is the image of Brando after they beat him up on the waterfront, and he's got blood all over him. And I felt that it was more gruesome, and I think that had something to do with news, because the news was all black and white at that time. There was no color TV yet, and I always felt that black and white, the blood looked more real, and in color, most of the color blood was John Wayne blood, and not very realistic, a little too bright, a little too red. And I honestly felt that black and white blood looked gorier, and so I decided to stick with black and white.
Juxtapose this with Dawn of the Dead, which is intended to be comedic. The blood is cartoonishly red. It indeed makes it less serious. That's then enhanced by the editing done by Romero himself, as well as the soundtrack and cinematography. Dead Rising possesses a similar charm that makes it so much more entertaining. The juxtaposition of the horror and comedy is what makes the satire so biting, pun intended. Zombies in a shopping mall is an inherently unserious concept. The zombies are more often playthings for Frank than they are a serious threat. The art direction of Dead Rising has a particular style that suits its satirical nature, and it has a unique contrast that is ominous when needed. I want to talk about color first, because it is the most noticeable when looking at these works simultaneously. Both Dawn of the Dead and Dead Rising have quite vivid palettes. Every color stands out from each other. The blue on Roger and Peter's uniforms contrasts with Fran and Steven's warm outfits. The shopping mall is full of vibrant lights and greenery. It all works together to create this beautifully tragic setting. The remake replaces this with a gritty cinematic color grade that was extremely popular in the 2000s. There's no attempt to coordinate anything, it's just bland and forgettable. The same thing happened with Dead Rising. The original is vibrant and creative, while the remaster made it desaturated and dull. The character models in the original Dead Rising are also fittingly cartoonish. That's not just because of graphical limitations, because a year before this, Capcom released Resident Evil 4, which had very realistic looking character models, at least for the time. When you see these models in action, they are animated quite erratically as well. They don't move naturally whatsoever, fitting how they look. So when they decided to remaster these models, it really does make it quite odd to look at, because the higher fidelity increases how unsettling it looks, and maybe that is intentional. Perhaps the developers wanted to have these models be more disturbing, but I doubt it given their complete lack of forethought in most other regards. The deluxe remaster, much like Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, proves that more production value does not necessarily improve the quality of a story. Even though these two remasters are quite different in that Dawn of the Dead is essentially a completely different zombie film that also happens to mostly take place in a mall, I draw the comparison here anyway because they both lack the soul that the original works have. This is exactly the point of Dawn of the Dead.
And that's the beauty of
I know, the characters, all of a sudden, when they have it, in that brief moment, when they have it all, they're dead.
They're dead. Yes.
When you are given everything, you really don't have anything. It is in adversity and limitations that create personality in life. One of the most iconic parts of Dead Rising is the sound design. The shopping mall music playing alongside the copious amounts of killing sets the tone of this game. So when the military comes and kills all the zombies, the music stops. It is especially unsettling for the player who has at this point gotten used to the constant sound. And now suddenly there is nothing but the distant sounds of gunshots and drones. The remaster decided to miss this detail, and the music keeps playing even after the military comes. To be honest, I wouldn't have spotted this detail myself if it wasn't for Neo-Cranian's playthrough.
Was the music playing in the original? Because I could have swore it was just dead silent in the original, and that was the point of this moment in the game. Is that it's just completely silent. It was silent. It was dead silent. Yeah, that's the point of this specific moment in the game. Is supposed to be nothing. And it doesn't help that you can zoom through time, so you're not even thinking about like the gunfire outside. The fact that everything goes in real time is an important part of the pacing of the game, which brings this specific moment, like contrast. If you just zoom through time and now you're here, the impact is nothing compared to what it is in the original.
Neo-Cranian is my favorite streamer. I love him, and his Dead Rising stream really kickstarted my motivation to make this video. So thank you, Neo. Thanks, Neo. I'm waving at my microphone right now. I hope that was obvious. Another thing I wouldn't have noticed if not for other YouTubers is the AI upscale textures that Chromecat displays in their video on DRDR. Sorry, can I just talk for a sec about how much I miss mirrors in games? It is so strange that despite how much graphical fidelity has improved, they somehow forgot how to make functioning mirrors. Or they just stopped bothering. Even with ray tracing, mirrors look so strange and unreal. It completely takes me out of a game when a reflection that should work just doesn't, and I'm just staring at an empty void of weird light refractions. Functioning mirrors was so cool in all games, and it just enhanced the immersion, especially in first-person games where you could actually see your player character and believe that you were taking control of him. But I guess that's just another thing that's been lost to time, like optimization. I think Chromecat could have done a bit more to show how the remaster improves on the original, like the ability to skip dialogue, thank god, but at least this proves that the remaster really did remove the humanity from the original.
These creatures are nothing but pure, motorized instinct. We must not be lulled by the concept that these are our family members or our friends. They are not. They will not respond to such emotions. They must be destroyed on sight.
The thing that separates the zombie genre from other horror categories like supernatural horror, occult horror, creature features, is familiarity, both in terms of familiarity with the monsters themselves and how to deal with them. Unlike ghosts or demons, we can't separate them from our sympathy. Zombies are family, friends, people who had lives. On top of this, zombies don't have malicious intent. They are compared to animals in that way, so they aren't really evil in a conventional sense. Something that struck me when watching all of these interviews with George A. Romero is how often he talks about giving zombies personality. It made me watch his films in a completely new light, because they really are just as much characters as the humans are. Now the first thing you'll think of is obviously Bub from Day of the Dead. But even before that, Romero intended these creatures to be characters. In Dawn, one of the first zombies we see in the mall steals an M16 from Roger. You would expect it to be a one-off gag, but we see him all throughout the film. Then, towards the end, we see him take Peter's rifle and swap it for the M16. The zombies have these little moments that give them humanity, that, while providing comedy, also remind us of the implied horror in this scenario. The thought of seeing a loved one turn into one of these things, reminding us that they are not so separated from us, only showing our baser instincts. It is these small details that I find brilliant about these films, and something that I feel is overlooked when talking about them. Dead Rising uses this mostly for comedic relief, like zombies tripping over ledges, or it is used for mechanical reasons, like the cop zombies shooting you with handguns. It is the human reactions, however, that are most commonly looked at in zombie media. How people behave when civilization crumbles before their eyes. Romero explores this in all of his films. The main characters in Night refuse to listen to each other because of their personal emotions or pride to their own detriment. In Day, the impatience of the military leads them to killing the scientists they're supposed to protect. And when it's not the main characters, we see other groups like the bikers in Dawn who don't give a fuck about the zombies and spend their time terrorizing survivors. Dead Rising is more of a conspiracy story, so it doesn't quite focus on a central cast, but it explores the reason behind the outbreak. The government commissions a project to create a more convenient method of mass-producing cattle to meet the increasing demand for meat. So a group of scientists create a virus transmitted by wasps that reanimates dead cattle and essentially makes them immortal. The problem is the virus makes the meat inedible, and its effects on humans are, well, it is a much larger scale story compared to the Romero films, but it communicates the same themes of hope and despair, and ultimately, the government being shit. Don't get me wrong, the characters are a big part of the story. Frank's relationships with Brad and Jesse do develop, and their deaths are quite affecting, especially when you have to kill them yourself. But it doesn't quite study their personalities as much as the Romero films tend to do. More specific commentary is expressed in a relatively focused and pointed way through the psychopaths. Psychopaths in Dead Rising are described as people who have gone mad because of the zombie apocalypse. They are very caricaturish depictions of different institutions, like Joe the cop who ties up and sexually harasses women in a clothing store, or Stephen the grocery store manager who does not take kindly to vandalism.
Listen to me, and listen good, partner. I don't allow vandalism in my store!
They really don't shy away from making fun of or critiquing every part of American culture. Halfway through the game, the mall is taken over by a cult, and the leader of said cult is killed by the object of his worship. In other instances, they are tragic characters like Cliff, the Vietnam veteran, whose family is killed by zombies, triggering his PTSD, causing him to act like he's still in the war. I will say there are some elements that have not held up well, mainly the fatphobic themes throughout the game, and most controversially, the sexist elements. The remaster decided to handle these parts very haphazardly. They removed the erotic genre from the camera, but they didn't actually remove the erotic content. The erotic content of Dead Rising could be seen as an extension of the themes of excess and a critique of America's obsession with sex, but I am in no position to defend it or justify it, and given Japan's track record of sexual exploitation, I would not bet on it being satire. Cletus in the gun store saying, "You guys would kill just to get a gun," is satire, and it is very obviously satire. But texturing panties on female models just for players who decide to look at them with the camera and rewarding them for that is, on all accounts, gross. If it was contained to Kent's story, I could definitely see it as a satirical interpretation, because he is an incredibly gross individual, except it still encourages the player to seek out that stuff without the context of a weird guy who carries 5 cameras and 3 tripods on him at all times. Instead, the developers of the remaster decided to censor any references to Vietnam for Cliff. This is the part that actually infuriated me. The only reason they did this is because Cliff says a derogatory term for Vietnamese soldiers, and he says commie, which is incredibly stupid.
Oh yeah, I know why. It's because you're Viet Cong. I'm right. Aren't I? You are nothing but a filthy communist!
It's because you're a mole. I'm right. Aren't I? You are nothing but a filthy animal!
The entire point of his character is the fact that he was traumatized specifically from Vietnam. The Vietnam War was a real event that had tangible impacts on people like Tom Savini, for example, who was a war photographer in Vietnam. Now he just references some generic war and calls Frank a mole? It is the most tone-deaf example of virtue signaling I've ever seen, and completely misses the point of the character.
The war... it wasn't over. Not for me. It never ended.
Something I love about George A. Romero is that he never pandered to audiences or studios. He chose to not work with major studios specifically to make the films that he wanted. He decided to make only what he wanted without interference, even if it was at the expense of mainstream success. As a result, they are pure expressions of his ideas, his politics, and his artistic choices. I think people connect to his films more because of this. All art is political no matter what. They always represent what the creator's views are, whether intentional or not. The thing is, sometimes even George Romero makes mistakes. He said multiple times in the past that he regrets his portrayal of Barbara in Night of the Living Dead. She is quite an outdated female character, and in his words, was practically useless from the beginning. I suppose a more apt comparison for DRDR is the Night of the Living Dead remake from 1990, directed by Tom Savini, because it is a much more direct beat-for-beat remaster than Dawn was. It drastically improves the visuals in terms of makeup and color, but it completely misses the mark when it comes to the substance. It quote-unquote fixes Barbara's character in the most superficial, false feminist way possible. Savini says that he was inspired by Ellen Ripley from Alien, but the difference is Ellen Ripley was shown as a competent character from the beginning. Barbara instead has a lesbian haircut, and as soon as she gets a stern talking to by a male authority figure, turns into a stoic badass who can inexplicably use a gun like a professional marksman. The ending was also changed completely, so Barbara survives and Ben turns into a zombie. It is a very stupid and pointless remake. This is because it was literally intended to be a cash grab. It was initially pitched because the copyright on the name Night of the Living Dead didn't exist for a long time, so for the purpose of capitalizing on the IP, they asked George Romero to recreate it. He eventually convinced Tom Savini to direct it, and in an interview said that he had a terrible time making it because he was under so much pressure from the studio. A lot of the ideas he and Romero had come up with were ultimately cut because they would have made the film unrated, thus harming profits. DRDR does feel similar in that it was made under poor intentions. It's hard to know if the developers didn't care because they knew it was a lazy cash grab, or if it wasn't up to them at all. Either way, it is disappointing that original artists are rarely given a say when their works are reproduced. And it really is the same for any industry in which huge sums of money is involved.
Something my granddaddy used to tell us. You know Macumba? Voodoo. Granddad was a priest in Trinidad. He used to tell us, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
The zombie genre will always be attributed to George A. Romero, which is both a curse and a blessing. His series of films do comprise some of the best the horror genre has to offer. However, as a filmmaker, he has made other films that are just as good, if not better. Martin, Night Riders, Creepshow, The Crazies. These are incredible films that deserve to be remembered, and his legacy far surpasses 3 films that were made between these. I suppose the thing that I worry most about is the misinterpreting of these works, as they are further separated from the time they were released. The most egregious of which has already happened with the remakes of his films, particularly the 2004 Dawn of the Dead, which throws in iconic lines from the original with no context or care for what they originally meant, or their significance in their themes.
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
I suppose his legacy was already tainted by the films he released after Land of the Dead being terrible, but no one watched them, so they don't really matter. I don't know if the team behind Dead Rising Deluxe Remastered genuinely thought that the allusions to the Vietnam War or the sexually explicit content was offensive, or if they got rid of it because they were told to by corporate executives, and didn't have any sense of artistic integrity. Artistic integrity is really the most important part of both Dawn of the Dead and Dead Rising. It is the thing that makes them so timeless. The creatives behind both of them, and I'm not just talking about George Romero or Yoshinori Kawano, I mean everyone who was part of their creation, stuck with their ideas and visions despite how it might divide audiences or negatively impact sales.
We were at the airport and there was a zombie, and George wanted me to scream. What do you mean you're not going to? I said, I'm not screaming. I wasn't going to run and scream or cry or do any of that. It was early feminist, pre-Sigourney Weaver, pre-Alien, where the woman was the protagonist that hadn't been explored yet in horror films. After that, he never asked me to scream.
All of the greatest art carries this quality fundamentally. If artists purely catered to corporate executives and the demands of the market, then we'd always get Disney movies. Unless that artist is Zack Snyder. Even when he gets full say, it ends up being shit. There's really no accounting for bad taste, huh? All jokes aside, people still talked more about the Snyder Cut of the Justice League than the theatrical release, because it was more representative of a piece of art than a piece of content. Content is really the key word here. I hate when people refer to things as content. It is the most corporate, soulless term to ever be attributed to anything. Content is the reason why movies and video games keep getting reboots and remasters and remakes. Art has become just another product to be mass-produced and consumed. Original art should not need to be replicated, unless there is a particular reason for it. That's not just to update it for modern audiences or continue its legacy. And I know I'm not helping. I love remakes when they're good, unlike DR. Resident Evil 2 Remake is one of my favorite games of all time. I also know that the original game did not need a remake, and stands on its own as a great game, but I haven't played it. Sometimes controls and quality of life can be important to experiencing a game, but it does not necessarily mean that it needs to be completely recreated. Recreating means overwriting the original creator's work. Even though the original still exists, it's not as easily accessible as the remake is, meaning that people will be less likely to search for that original art. I know that a lot of people complained about the removed content from RE2 Remake, but I didn't even notice it because I never played the original, so I wouldn't even know what I was missing out on. And that's the same for the majority of the audience that ended up playing RE2 Remake. There will never be enough content. There always needs to be more, and when there are not enough creatives to make that content, they'll use AI or dig up the corpses of past artworks to recreate the same shit over and over again. AI is the wasps of art. It takes the remains and turns them into an unrecognizable, disgusting mess that lacks any life or sentience. Culture will consume itself until we enter a constant loop of temporary satisfaction. There is an excess of content that we get through streaming services, Steam, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and yet we complain that our bellies are not full. Thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun making this video. If you're wondering why I didn't talk at all about the sequels, it's mainly because I couldn't get through them. Dead Rising 2 had such dogshit feeling gameplay. Everything felt so much slower, the walking speed is like a geriatric turtle, and every swing of a weapon is weak as hell. I never even tried Dead Rising 3, and Dead Rising 4 sucks ass. I also don't think they represent anything resembling what the original had. They were all made by a different studio, and the writing is completely different. It would be the same as if I included Return of the Living Dead among George Romero's films. I didn't include the later Living Dead films either for similar reasons. They're just not good or representative of what George A. Romero was known for. Other than that, I am so grateful for all the people who have supported me over the past 3 years now that I've been making videos on this channel. And if you want to support me even more, I do have a Patreon that I would like to be more active on. It is just hard to be active on it when there's no one looking at it. Patreon is what gives original creatives more freedom to make what they want without needing big companies to control them, so I would greatly appreciate any help you can give.